Londongrad, a city awash with money from the many rich Russians who call it home. And not all of them have earned their income honestly. This week, the British Parliament is passing a new law to curb the corrupt flow of money from Russia, to untangle opaque ownership structures. But this is only a first step, experts say.
Legislation is just not enough. Enforcement needs to happen, and it needs to be properly funded and resourced. What happens right now is that the National Crime Agency has been underfunded for a generation. So what we need to see now is for law enforcement agencies to be funded to act now and use the tool that they are given at the moment.
Security personnel on Eaton Square try to prevent us from recording.
Is that what you're threatening to do? No.
It's a democracy, and despite us having the right to film on the street.
If you want to put property, you can film as you like. First and foremost, I'd like to see 100 oligarchs on the sanctions list having their properties frozen. Secondly, I'd like to see assets identified and frozen after that. And thirdly, I'd like to see all of the Russian banks, not just a few of them, disconnected from SWIFT.
His criticism also has a personal motivation. Browder's friend and company lawyer died in a Russian prison. He's long known how dangerous Vladimir Putin is.
Russian oligarchs, and in fact anyone else who wanted to launder their money, have so far been serviced well in London. It's been easy to find bankers, lawyers, estate agents to work with. And when it comes to property, it's been possible to hide behind sophisticated shell structures, often within an offshore trust. Critics are wondering whether it's taken a war in Europe for the UK government to seriously change that.
Big Mars in London for us there. Now it's your chance to ask the questions. We've been trawling through the comments underneath our YouTube videos to find out exactly what people want to know. And Janelle Dumalaun joins me in the studio to answer some of those. So Janelle, what sort of areas are people most curious about?
Well, Rob, this may not surprise you, but we're getting a lot of questions about energy and energy security. They're dominating our comment sections. And I guess that's really a reflection of the fact that on the back of already high inflation and energy prices, the discussion around accessing affordable and reliable energy is a very live question for our viewers, understandably so. I'm worried about my heating, you're worried about your heating, and that's the kind of that's the reason we're seeing the comments that we are today.
Okay, well, let's go to our first viewer question. This one comes from John Linares, who asks, was it a good idea for Western Europe to rely on Russian energy?
Oh, the question's just coming up there now. But, well, yes, John Linares, I have to say that we're coming up against the limits of Wandel durch Handel. That, of course, is translated as change through economic trade. And, of course, it's this idea that if you engage a country, two countries in trade, then they both have a stake in ensuring the rule of law, peace and security as optimal business conditions. And in so doing, that could encourage them on the way to democracy. And that sort of led to the kind of economic relationship that we see between Russia and Europe now, an interdependence, you might call it. But since the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, we've seen a U-turn on Western European energy policy, showing that the consensus is, in fact, that it was not a good idea to rely so heavily on Russian energy. Wandel durch Handel has not perhaps worked as well as hoped. But because this was a relationship that was cemented over years, Western Europe is also having a harder time extricating itself from it than, say, the U.S. is. The U.S. has banned fuel imports from Russia, as we know. Western Europe says they would phase them out. So that's a difference in wording for you.
Right. John Linares, I hope that's answered your question. Moving on to our second question here. Now, this is from old James Cardozo, who has a question. It's about how Europe and Germany in particular can do without Russian gas. They've asked, can they just temporarily reactivate nuclear reactors or some coal plants as a stopgap measure?
Well, James, and yes, thank you for reminding our viewers that, in fact, Germany has leaned quite heavily into phasing out nuclear and into its energy transition, its shift into renewables in the past years. So starting with the first part of the question. So there was, in fact, a proposal on the table to reactivate Germany's 3 remaining nuclear sites. Earlier this week, the German government has decided that they did not want to do that, citing legal and practical concerns. Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck has said that even if they did do that, then it wouldn't be ready in time for winter of this year. The soonest time that this move could be of benefit is in autumn 2023. By then, it would be too late. So the picture for coal, however, looks a bit different. There is a bit more willingness to reactivate coal plants, especially reactivating coal plants as reserve supply to help out with this crunch. So obviously the question then becomes what happens to Germany's climate goals. But this is really a hard-learned lesson about what happens when you view energy policy through a single lens like climate policy without integrating the perspectives of security and foreign policy.
OK, Janelle Dumalaun, thank you for fielding those questions for us. Now, if you do head over to YouTube, you can also watch our series Business Beyond. In the latest episode, we asked the question, do sanctions work? And we'll also hear from experts about whether restrictions imposed on countries like North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela as well actually had the desired effect. You can find Business Beyond on the DW News YouTube channel. Now, Germany surprised many with its response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his government showed that they were willing to change their minds by eventually backing Russia's removal from SWIFT and suspending the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. But how does the German business community feel the crisis is being handled? Well, DW Business's Stephen Beardsley has been speaking to Siemens Energy chairman Joe Kaiser.
Thank you for joining us. You're obviously very tied into the European and German business scene. You're very well connected with a lot of these leaders. What are you hearing from them right now? How great a rupture is this for the European and German business community at the moment because of this war?
People are very worried about the development. I think nobody would have guessed the magnitude of the attack, that it would go for the whole country rather than the eastern provinces, which was potentially widely expected in the business community, but more contained as it is today. So there's a lot of worry about what this will all be and how it's going to end. Yeah, I think it's too early to tell what it will mean for the business in the long term. Obviously, so people are quite worried. They're looking into their asset base. They're looking into the financing matters. They, of course, are all clear about what they think about the attack, and I think most of them voiced their opinion in a very clear way. And also, many companies stopped deliveries and would not take new business. There's two topics to that. The first one is, is it wise to burn all the bridges going forward or not? And secondly, as it is morally advisable and morally positive that the company leaders take a stance, they also need to go see what does it mean if you do not fulfill contractual obligations. What is it if you get a shareholder lawsuit because you would not ship the product, although it's not under sanction? If products are sanctioned, it's simple. Yeah, there's the primacy of the governmental law. But what if the products and the solutions are not sanctioned? Are you still, be the moral leader and get sued by shareholders? So that's something which I believe is now the top topic in the boardroom.
To what extent does a business have a moral responsibility, especially when it means risking the ire of its shareholders or even the litigation of shareholders?
I believe companies and their leaders do have a moral obligation. I mean, just thinking the business of business is business. If it has ever been valid, it was more in the 70s and 80s, but not today. I believe businesses also have a societal responsibility and impact the freedom and peace and integration of interest as much as they can. So the good news this time is that mostly in Europe, but certainly in Germany, there is a so-called business judgment rule. So what you can do is, as a management and the board, you would discuss the ramifications, the legal, the moral, the economic ones, and then you would make a business judgment after deliberation and discussion.
Will this change this idea that's been prevalent in German business of Wandel durch Handel, that is transformation through trade? Will everything that we're seeing, will that transform that right now, or will there be a tendency to go back?
It has brought millions of people out of poverty. It's a fact. Look about China, millions of people out of poverty. Should you, for that and for your profits and for your growth, mistreat human rights? Absolutely not. So what I have always tried to do is to look at what is an area of influence and what's an area of concern. Have I been concerned about Xinjiang? Absolutely. Have I been concerned about Hong Kong? Absolutely. But that's an area of concern. Would I have ever even closely accepted forced labor in our companies or at our suppliers? Hell no. Because that's been my area of impact and influence. So that's a constant struggle.
Looking beyond the immediacy of this war, what will this mean for Germany's transformation to renewables? Will it add an extra boost to this effort to get away from oil and gas and other fossil fuels? We should, of course, note here that you are chairman of the supervisory board for Siemens Energy.
We need to find a comprehensive concept between renewable generation and fossil generation. What's there already? What needs to be built? How long can we extend what's there already? And what does it take to build the future? There is no point in shutting down coal-fired power plants if we don't have built the future yet. By the same token, it doesn't make a lot of sense to build hundreds of thousands of megawatts for renewable energy if you don't have the grid available, which transports, which connects, the consumer with the supplier. So we have to have, I think the biggest wake-up call for government, especially also the German government, ought to be now, sit together, bring everybody who can bring something to the table together in a concerted action and make a plan for 2030. How will the war impact today? How are we going to get the grid in place so that we have today's resources connected? In peak times, if the sun shines in the south and the wind blows in the north, we do have more renewable generation capacity already than the whole country needs. But if that is not connected, a bad idea. So think about what's relevant, what's important, what's very urgent, what's urgent, and what can be done at a later stage. And then I believe we have a plan which we can execute in a meaningful way. And that's been missing for years.
That's Siemens Energy Chairman and former Siemens CEO Joe Kaeser speaking to Stephen Busy. And you can find an extended version of that interview on our website, dw.com/business. And that's all from this DW Business Special, looking at the financial impact of the war in Ukraine. For more, do check us out on YouTube. DW News YouTube channel is where you can find us. Until next time, take care.
Sometimes a seed is all you need to allow big ideas to grow. We're bringing environmental conservation to life with Learning Packs by Global Ideas. We will show you how climate change and environmental conservation is taking shape around the world and how we can all make a difference. Knowledge grows through sharing. Download it now for free. Stay up to date. Don't miss our highlights. The DW program online. DW.com highlights.
This is DW News live from Berlin. Russian forces extend their aerial assault as explosions are reported in more Ukrainian cities. The city of Dnipro in central Ukraine is bombed for the first time in this war. Troops are also edging closer to the capital, Kiev, while hundreds of thousands remain trapped in the port city of Mariupol amid heavy bombardment. After days of shelling and broken ceasefires, some residents of Irpin, northwest of Kiev, are finally able to flee. DW's Matthias Böllinger has more from the ground. An EU summit to discuss the bloc's response to the war in Ukraine is drawing to a close. While member states agree on increasing military aid for Ukraine, divisions remain about a ban on Russian gas imports. We'll bring you the post-summit statements live. I'm Sumi Somaskanda. Thank you for joining us. Russian forces are extending their airstrikes on Ukrainian cities a day after high-level talks between Moscow and Kiev failed to produce a diplomatic breakthrough. Emergency services in central Ukraine say civilian targets in Dnipro were hit in the first aerial bombardment of the city. Russia says it destroyed 2 military airfields in Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk, and the Kremlin has unilaterally announced humanitarian corridors in places including Mariupol, Kharkiv, Sumy, and Cherniv. Ukraine says civilians are suffering, but agreements to evacuate people have failed multiple times due to ongoing Russian bombardment. And a metro station in the besieged city of Kharkiv has become a makeshift shelter for civilians trapped in the fighting. Russia says it will establish a humanitarian corridor in the city, Ukraine's second largest. Most of the 1.5 million residents have already fled Kharkiv, which has been under sustained bombardment. And Ukrainian authorities say that 40,000 people have now been evacuated from 5 different Ukrainian cities. But they say Russian troops continue to break ceasefires to allow more residents to flee. In Irpin, northwest of Kiev, people have been fleeing amid heavy bombardment as Russian forces advance on the capital. Now, a brief pause in shelling has allowed more residents to escape. Our correspondent, Matthias Böllinger, is there.
Finally boarding a bus to safety. These refugees have just come out of the fighting zone northwest of Kiev. Daria has been on the road for hours.
We left everything there and just fled. I don't know whether we will ever be able to come back.
Irpin, a suburb northwest of Kiev, has been one of the worst hit places in this war. Ceasefires have been agreed and broken time and again. Just a few days ago, a family of 4 was killed near this bridge. They were shelled on their way out of the small town. This is one of the places that had been fought about for days. People have been sitting there, trapped, waiting for an opportunity to get out. Leaving behind what they could not carry with them, people have been fleeing in a hurry. Shelling can start again at any moment. Some have been walking for many kilometers before being able to cross over the bridge to reach one of the buses.
It's difficult and terrifying. The roads are destroyed. There's destroyed military equipment everywhere. Dead bodies lie around. We saw all this while walking. It's difficult for everybody, including old women. It's very frightening.
Many here have no idea where to go next. This kindergarten was closed after the war began. It's now hosting people who have fled the fighting.
Some arrive without even wearing slippers. Some come without a coat. There are some grandmothers who went out to fetch water and were evacuated because their lives were under threat.
Whole retirement homes have been evacuated. The refugees can rest here for a few days.
Everybody from our neighbourhood left. A plane flew over us. Then it suddenly turned, dropped a bomb and everything was on fire. Volunteers quickly evacuated us.
As evacuation of Irpin and other suburbs goes on, the kindergarten braces for more people to arrive in the coming days.
Correspondent Alexandra von Namen joins us now from western Ukraine, from the city of Lviv. Hi, Alexandra. Tell us what the latest is on the ground and where you are.
Well, Sumi, when you see me now standing in the sun, you would assume that's a wonderful, beautiful day here in Lviv. However, we had to seek shelter in a bunker already twice this morning. The first air raid alarm went off about 5 o'clock in the morning. The second one just a short while ago. And we have to say that it's very, very striking and worrying that the Russian forces are now attacking places that are far away from the main advance. There were several explosions in Lutsk, a city northwest of Lviv, a city that we visited just a few days ago. The Russian Defense Ministry acknowledged that they were attacking a military airport there. They also attacked a military airport in Ivano-Frankivsk, a city southwest in Ukraine. And this is showing you that the Russian forces are intensifying their efforts to slow the flow of weapons and resources to the front lines across from the western Ukraine.
And they're also encircling major cities across Ukraine, Alexander. So what's your sense? How are Ukrainians coping under this sustained threat 2 weeks into this war?
Well, in general, we have to say that, of course, everyone is trying to find their own way to cope with the situation. Some people decided to flee the country, to leave the country, to cross the border to Poland, for example. Some people that I've been talking with told me that after what happened in Mariupol, after this horrifying attack on a children's hospital there, they told me that they now feel more determined than ever to fight back, to defend their country. But of course, we have to stress that the main task for the Ukrainian forces now is to get out those who are trapped in the cities like Mariupol, other cities under siege. And it's very difficult to get them out. There will be humanitarian corridors to be open today again, but of course it depends on whether the Russian forces will stop firing on those evacuation routes.
More than 2 million people have fled the country already. Are people there in Lviv willing to stay, or are they also considering leaving?
It really depends on whom you're talking with. People who came here from, for instance, the central or eastern part of the country, people who had to hide with their children for days in their cellars or holes, people who escaped the Russian artillery fire, they normally would say, we need to get out, we need to leave the country. But of course, there are residents of Lviv who have their apartments, their families here, and they for now want to stay.
DW's Alexandra von Namen with the latest there from Lviv. Thank you very much. And we can take a look now at some other developments in the conflict. Demonstrators took to the streets of Melitopol in Ukraine to protest the Russian invasion and the presence of Russian forces in their town. The United Nations has warned aid is desperately needed in places like Melitopol and appealed to Moscow to allow for safe passage. Humanitarian corridors have come under attack during previously agreed upon ceasefires. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has denied Moscow's allegation that Kiev is preparing a chemical or biological weapons attack. The UN Security Council is meeting today to discuss the accusation upon Russia's request. The U.S. is warning that Moscow is making the allegation as it prepares to use such weapons in Ukraine. And Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko has arrived in Moscow for talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko has supported Putin's invasion and allowed Russian troops to move into Ukraine from its territory. At a meeting with military officials on Thursday, Lukashenko said Belarus's army must prevent any attack on Russian forces from the rear in Ukraine. EU leaders are meeting in France for a second day of talks on the bloc's response to the invasion of Ukraine. Major topics on the agenda are defense spending and Europe's dependence on Russian fossil fuels. After the first day of talks, the bloc ruled out fast-tracking Ukrainian membership to the EU, but welcomed the idea of the country joining the bloc. And this is what Slovenian Prime Minister Janez Janša had to say this morning.
Today is a formal summit, so we will just take political decisions. Most probably next formal summit this month will take further steps. But this is new world, so during last 2 weeks and something, world has changed, and we have changed also, but not enough.
Let's go right to Versailles, where we can speak to our correspondent, Barbara Wiesel, standing by for us there. Hi, Barbara. We heard the Slovenian Prime Minister there saying, we have not changed enough. What outcome do you think we can expect from the summit?
They have not changed enough, he said, and many here think that he's right, because the European Union has not been capable of sending a clear accession signal to Ukraine, something that Volodymyr Zelensky wanted to encourage his people, to tell them you have a Western perspective, a European perspective, but the cautious ones and those that think about the consequences, something like that, have prevailed in the long debate last night, East against West mostly. In the end, the old member states won, and so there's just a bit of diplomatic formula coming out of the EU with regard to that accession bid. And also, it is quite clear that at the moment they are not ready to go further on hardening the sanctions, not in a serious way. Maybe a few more oligarchs or a few more banks will be put on lists in the next days. But the final step, the one that means they will turn off Russian oil and gas and not import this anymore, they will not do, not right now. And the Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin said this quite clearly. We are, with our oil and gas imports, financing Putin's war. But at the moment, they don't see any other way.
Why is that, Barbara? I mean, how divided are member states on this question of Russian oil and gas?
they are divided. There are, of course, again, many of the Eastern Europeans who say, oh, we have to do this. It's the only way that we could really influence Putin, really put such strong pressure on him that he would probably start negotiations or sort of relent in a way. But again, many are cautious. The Hungarian Prime Minister said we can't do this. The Bulgarian said it's difficult for us. And Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, said we are not capable of doing it. The consequences for the German economy would be too grave, even though recent polls have now shown that a majority of German citizens is in favor of this. And more than 50% Germans say this needs to be done. We should bear the consequences. But the government is cautious and they don't want to go that way yet. Like, that might change in the next days or weeks when atrocity in Ukraine committed by Russia pile up further. But at the moment, there is nothing really to see here in Versailles.
Okay, given that caution, those divisions, how much more efforts do you think we can expect from the EU?
They will, of course, do what they can. They are proposing to give another 500 million euros in military aid. They have, of course, released emergency funds to support the Ukrainian government to buy food and fuel and whatever they need. They are trying to, of course, bring in humanitarian aid, which is difficult because the logistics of that are quite complicated. It's only by truck and by Poland and Romanian highways going into Ukraine, and they come under shelling. So it is difficult because even the